Story 1 provided by Michael Dunn. It was a Thursday night. One of those nights where everything felt so ordinary, it made what happened next even harder to believe. I'd just gotten home from work around 8:30. My job's stressful, so I tend to zone out once I walk through the front door, take out on the couch, some show I barely watch, and just decompress. That's my routine. I live alone, so it's easy to slip into the quiet. About an hour later, I heard a knock. Not soft, not casual, sharp, quick. I almost ignored it. I wasn't expecting anyone, and nobody just pops by these days. I paused for a second, listening. Maybe it was a neighbor or someone delivering to the wrong house, which has happened before. I opened the door, and there's this guy standing there. Late 30s, average looking, but something about him seemed off. His hood was up, and he wasn't making eye contact, just kind of shuffling around like he didn't want to be there. Hey, sorry to bother you, man, he said, glancing past me into my house for just a second. My phone's dead, and my car's broken down a few blocks over. You think I could borrow your phone to call for a tow? I hesitated. Something about the situation felt wrong, but what if he really needed help? We hear stories all the time about people being in real trouble and no one helping them because they seemed off. I didn't want to be that guy. Sure, I said, trying to keep my tone light but cautious. Hang on. I closed the door, locked it, then grabbed my phone from the kitchen. It wasn't until I came back to the door that I started second-guessing myself. Why didn't he knock at someone else's house closer to his broken-down car? Why didn't he ask me to call for him instead of borrowing my phone? Still, I opened the door and handed him my phone. He glanced around, eyes darting toward my front window for a second, but he wasn't really dialing. He just kept looking at the screen like he was faking it. You need help with something? I asked, a little sharper than I meant to. He paused, then muttered, Nah, it's fine. Thanks, though. And then, just like that, he handed the phone back and walked away. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. I watched him leave, feeling a knot in my stomach. The way he moved, how quiet he was. It didn't sit right with me. I locked the door again and went back to the couch, trying to shake the feeling. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I was being paranoid. But something about his eyes, the way he scanned my house, it stuck with me. 10 minutes later, I heard another sound. This time it wasn't from outside. It came from the back of the house near my bedroom. A soft thud like something had shifted or been knocked over. I froze. My mind raced. Was it just the house settling or maybe the wind? But deep down, I knew. I knew someone was in my house. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got to the bedroom, the louder the silence felt, if that makes any sense. Like the house itself was waiting. When I reached the door, it was cracked open, just slightly. I never leave my bedroom door open, ever. I pushed it open slowly, my hands shaking. And that's when I saw him. Another man, standing right in the middle of my room, facing the window. He was tall, dressed all in black, and holding something in his hand. I couldn't tell what at first. It looked like a small bag or pouch. I didn't think. I just reacted. "Get the hell out of my house!" I shouted, my voice trembling. He didn't move. He just stood there for a second, then slowly turned to look at me. His face was calm, too calm. He held up his hand, the one with the small bag, and I realized he wasn't holding a weapon. It was my house keys, the spare set I kept in my bedroom drawer. How long had he been in there? He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just gave me this cold look, dropped the keys onto the floor, and walked past me out of the room. I wanted to stop him, to yell, to call the cops, anything. But I couldn't move. It felt like time had stopped. By the time I snapped out of it and ran after him, he was already gone. The front door was wide open, swinging in the breeze. He had vanished, just like that. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, no evidence that anyone had even been inside, except for the missing keys, which I found in the hallway, right where he dropped them. The officer asked me a bunch of questions. Had I left any doors unlocked? Was anyone else supposed to be in the house? I explained the guy who knocked earlier, and they took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. No witnesses, no solid description. They told me to change my locks and be more careful. I did all that the very next day. New locks, security cameras, the works. But that doesn't stop the feeling that someone's still watching, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear a noise that doesn't quite belong. Every time I come home, I hesitate before opening the door, wondering if today will be the day they come back. It's been months now, and I haven't seen them since, but every knock at the door still makes my heart skip a beat. Because the thing is, they didn't take anything. They didn't need to. They just wanted to remind me. Story 2, provided by Daniel Miller. You ever have one of those nights where nothing feels right? Everything's fine on the surface, same job, same routine, but something's just off. That was me last Friday. It had been a long day and I was exhausted, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. I live in a small suburban neighborhood, quiet, boring, the kind of place where you know your neighbors but don't really talk much. Anyway, I got home around 6. My wife, Jess, was out with friends for the night, so it was just me. I was looking forward to a quiet evening alone. I made a sandwich, plopped on the couch, and turned on some game I wasn't really paying attention to. You know how it is when you just need background noise. A couple of hours went by and I was starting to doze off. That's when I heard it, the back door creak. Now, I don't know about you, but I know every sound my house makes. The back door makes a very specific creak when it opens. It's always had this slight drag against the floor. At first I thought maybe it was the wind or maybe Jess came home early, but she would have texted me. I sat up listening, another creak, then footsteps. I froze. My first instinct was denial. I mean, it's easy to tell yourself, nah, it's nothing when you don't want to believe something's wrong. But my heart was pounding. Those footsteps weren't my wife's, too heavy, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone, but of course, it was dead. Typical. I got up as quietly as I could, not even sure what I was going to do. The logical part of me kept whispering, it's nothing, probably just the house settling. But deep down, I knew. I headed for the kitchen, where the back door was. I figured maybe it didn't close all the way or something was messing with it, but the door was shut, locked even. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like someone was watching me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The house was completely still, too still. It was the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. You know what I mean? I didn't hear anything else for a few minutes, and I almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. I walked back to the living room trying to relax, but that's when I noticed something off. The basement door was open. We never leave the basement door open, ever. My stomach dropped. I stared at the door, my brain trying to catch up with what I was seeing. I couldn't even remember the last time I went down there. We hardly used the basement, just a storage area for holiday decorations and old junk we don't need. I walked over, and that's when I noticed it. The smell. A faint, musty odor like something had been down there too long. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was enough to make me gag a little. I reached out and grabbed the door handle, my hand shaking. Part of me wanted to slam it shut, but I had to see. I had to know if someone was down there. I flicked the light switch and stepped onto the first stair, listening. It was dead quiet, not even the hum of the old freezer we keep down there. My heart was in my throat, but I kept going. The steps creaked under my weight, echoing off the concrete walls. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something. There was a light on in the far corner, behind some boxes. I didn't remember leaving any lights on. My hand clenched tighter around the small flashlight I'd grabbed from the kitchen, and I walked slowly toward the back of the basement. I rounded the stack of boxes, and that's when I saw him. A man, sitting there in the corner with his back to me. He was dressed in dark clothes, and at first I couldn't even tell if he was breathing. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I froze. I didn't know what to do. Call out? Run? Before I could move, he stood up, slowly. He didn't turn around, just stood there with his back to me. I was too scared to speak, too scared to breathe. Then, without warning, he turned his head just slightly, enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. Pale, expressionless, but his eyes, there was something wrong with them. They were empty, like he wasn't even there. And then he spoke. "You left the door unlocked." My blood ran cold. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed up. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Suddenly, he turned and walked straight past me, heading for the stairs. I was frozen, stuck in place as he calmly walked up and out of the basement. My brain screamed at me to run, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. I heard him walk through the house, back toward the kitchen and out the back door. I didn't move for what felt like forever. Eventually, I snapped out of it and ran to the back door. It was wide open. He was gone. I called the police, of course, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing missing. It was like he'd never even been there. The cops told me it was probably just some drifter who wandered in, but I don't believe that. How did he know the back door was unlocked, and why didn't he take anything? The worst part? I know I locked that door. I always lock that door. Jess came home later that night, and I didn't tell her everything. Just that someone had gotten inside. She was shaken, of course, but I played it down. What was I supposed to say? That I found some guy sitting in our basement acting like he belonged there? It's been a week, and I've barely slept since. Every creak, every bump in the night, I'm on edge. I've changed the locks, installed cameras, but that doesn't help. Because it's not just the fear of him coming back, it's the way he left, the calmness, the way he knew. Because the thing is, he didn't break in, he didn't force his way inside, he was just there. And that scares me more than anything else. Story 3 provided by James Porter. You ever have one of those nights where you know something's wrong but can't put your finger on it? That was me, 2 Fridays ago. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening and I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention to anything. My girlfriend, Sarah, had just left for a weekend trip with her friends and I was looking forward to having the place to myself. Some peace and quiet, you know? I live in a small house, nothing fancy. It's just me and Sarah, well, and our cat, Toby. The neighborhood's decent enough. You know, the kind where you wave at your neighbors but don't actually talk to them. Yeah, that kind. Anyway, I was about to start a movie when I heard a noise. It was faint, almost like a scratching sound coming from outside. At first, I brushed it off. I figured it was just the wind or maybe Toby messing around, but he was curled up on the couch next to me, sound asleep. I paused the movie and listened. There it was again, this time louder. It sounded like it was coming from the back door. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a branch scraping against the side of the house or something. I stood up, walked over to the kitchen window and peeked outside. Nothing. I felt a little stupid for getting worked up, but I still decided to check the back door just in case. I walked over, flipped on the light, and stared at the door for a second. It was locked, but as I reached for the handle, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were fresh scratches on the door frame. They weren't there this morning, I would have noticed. They were thin, like someone had been trying to pick the lock with something sharp. My pulse quickened, and I backed away from the door, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. Could it have been an animal? A raccoon or something? I grabbed my phone and pulled up Sarah's number. I almost called her, but I didn't want to freak her out for no reason. I mean, she was miles away with her friends, having a good time. And here I was, probably overreacting. Instead, I texted my buddy Greg. He lives about 15 minutes away and has this tough guy vibe, always telling me I'm too paranoid. Hey man, I typed. You ever seen scratches on your back door? Think it could be an animal? A few seconds later, his reply popped up. Dude, probably just a raccoon or something. Chill, you're not being robbed. That made me feel a little better. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I checked the time, it was almost 9 by then, and I decided to double-check all the doors and windows just in case. Front door, locked. Kitchen windows, locked. Back door, still locked, but the scratches kept gnawing at me. I knew they were fresh, and the more I thought about it, the more anxious I got. I was about to head back to the couch when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, not outside, inside. My heart was racing. I stood there, frozen, listening. They were faint, like someone was trying to be quiet, but I knew what I heard. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The footsteps were coming from the hallway near the bedrooms. I was alone. I was supposed to be alone. I wanted to tell myself it was Toby, but I knew it wasn't. The sound was too heavy, too deliberate. My body was screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. I just stood there listening, my mind racing. Who was in my house? How did they get in? I had just checked everything. Then another sound. A door creaking. Slowly. The bedroom door. I didn't have a weapon, and there was no way I was going down that hallway without something. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the kitchen drawer and started backing toward the front door, my phone still in my hand, shaking. I should have called the police right then, but my brain was spinning. I kept thinking, maybe it's nothing, maybe I'm imagining it. But deep down I knew. Someone was in my house. I crept toward the front door, trying to stay as quiet as possible, but the floorboards creaked under my weight. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard a voice, a low, raspy whisper from the hallway. "James." My heart stopped. How did they know my name? My hand tightened around the knife and I threw open the front door, sprinting outside without looking back. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the block, gasping for air. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, my voice barely steady enough to tell the operator what had happened. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I waited outside, pacing up and down the sidewalk, my eyes glued to my house, half expecting to see someone peering out at me from one of the windows. When the cops went in, they searched every inch of the place. I stood there watching them move from room to room, lights flashing as they opened closets, checked under the bed, even pulled back the shower curtain. Nothing, no one. They told me it was probably just a prank, maybe some kids messing around, but I knew better. Someone had been in my house. I could still hear that voice, that whisper echoing in my head. James. The police couldn't explain the scratches on the door or how someone could have gotten inside without leaving any signs of forced entry. They checked the locks, the windows, even the basement door. Everything was secure. I changed the locks the next day, put in a security system, got cameras for every corner of the house. Sarah came back from her trip and I told her everything. She tried to laugh it off, said I'd been watching too many horror movies, but I could tell it freaked her out too. It's been 2 weeks and I still can't sleep properly. Every little sound makes me jump. I keep thinking I hear those footsteps again, late at night, creeping through the hallway. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, half expecting to see someone standing at the foot of the bed. And that voice, I'll never forget it. James. Whoever they were, they knew my name, and I know they'll be back. Story 4, provided by Mark Harris. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Even now, every creak in this house makes my heart race. I guess I'll start from the beginning, where it all went wrong. It was a Thursday night, not that it matters much. I was home alone. My wife Lisa was out with friends and the kids were staying with my parents for the weekend. We live in a pretty quiet neighborhood, suburban, you know? The kind of place where people wave as they walk their dogs and everyone leaves their doors unlocked, thinking nothing bad ever happens here. I had just settled into the couch with a beer, ready to watch some mindless TV before heading to bed. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard it, this soft, almost polite knock on the door. Weird, right? I wasn't expecting anyone. I figured maybe it was a delivery gone wrong or one of those kids from down the street selling cookies again. I got up, casually walking to the door, but something made me pause. You know, I don't know why, but I hesitated. Maybe it was the time, it was late, or maybe it was just gut instinct. I stood there for a second, looking at the door, not sure whether to open it or not. I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. The porch light was on, so if someone had been standing there, I would have seen them. I thought about just ignoring it, going back to my show, but then I heard it again. Another knock, louder this time. My heart was beating a little faster now, but I still wasn't scared, just uneasy. I cracked the door open, just a little, you know? Enough to say, hello, but not enough to let anyone in. There was a guy standing there, just off to the side, almost out of sight. He looked normal, I guess, mid-30s, wearing a hoodie and jeans, but something about him felt off. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Hey man, my car broke down a few blocks over. Can I use your phone? I don't know what it was. Maybe the way he smiled or the fact that I didn't see a car parked anywhere nearby, but I just didn't trust him. Sorry, I said, I don't think I can help. I started to close the door, but he stepped forward, putting his hand on it before I could shut it completely. Come on, man, he said, still smiling that weird, cold smile. It'll just take a second. At that point, my gut was screaming at me. I pushed the door harder, forcing him to let go. "I can't help you," I repeated, my voice shaking just a little. I shut the door, locked it, and stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. For a moment it was quiet. I stood there, listening, waiting for him to leave. But then, the knocking started again, harder this time, like he was pounding on the door with his fists. My heart was racing now. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but as soon as I hit the call button, the pounding stopped. I stood frozen, my phone in my hand, listening. I didn't hear him walking away. No footsteps on the porch, no car starting, nothing, just silence. The operator answered, but I hung up. Maybe I was overreacting, maybe he really did just need help and I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I turned off the lights, hoping he'd think I wasn't home. I sat there in the dark, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, I'm not sure. I didn't hear anything else, so I started to relax. Maybe he gave up, I thought. Maybe he left. That's when I heard it. The sound of glass shattering. It came from the back of the house. My heart stopped. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a kitchen knife, and slowly made my way toward the noise. I was moving quietly, trying to breathe through my panic. The back door's window was smashed and the door was wide open. I froze. My mind was racing. I should have called the police again, but I didn't want to make a sound. I stood there, listening for any movement, any sign that he was still inside. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway, getting closer. I panicked. I don't know what I was thinking, but I ran back to the living room and hid behind the couch, clutching that stupid kitchen knife like it was going to save me. The footsteps got closer, and then they stopped, right outside the living room. I could hear him breathing, just standing there like he was waiting for me to make a move. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible, praying he wouldn't come in. Minutes passed. Each second felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, the footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away. Back down the hallway. I waited, listening as he moved toward the back door, and then silence. I stayed there, behind the couch, for what felt like hours. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek out. The door was still open, but he was gone. I called the police and they showed up within minutes. They searched the house, the yard, the whole neighborhood, but they didn't find anything. No fingerprints, no clues, nothing. It's like he was never there. But I know what I saw, what I heard. The police told me it was probably some random break-in, that I was lucky he didn't do more. But I can't shake the feeling that he wasn't just some random guy looking to rob a house. He knew I was there. He was waiting for me. Now, every time I hear a knock at the door or a creak in the house, my heart skips a beat. I can't sleep, I can't relax. Because what if he comes back? What if next time he doesn't leave so easily? I guess that's the worst part, the not knowing.